Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Off the Draw. This is where I talk about anything relating to the sport of hockey, mainly dealing with the NHL, and what a better topic right now in the NHL than talk about suspensions, because given the recent suspension of Alex Burrows for 3 games for his hit on Alexei Emelin, it's definitely something I really want to talk about. And being a Canucks fan, at first I was kind of shocked he got 3 games. I was expecting about 2 games based on past precedents, but 3 games, I'm a fan of that. I like that. And I'll go in a little bit deeper to why I like that later on. But first, let's talk about the Department of Player Safety. And first and foremost, the Department of Player Safety has been doing a much better job in the past 3 years. They've been getting better and better, more consistent, and everything has kind of been working out to the point where they're suspending players that should be suspended for their hits. And it's nice to see that. It's nice to see them kind of care for their players a little bit more, get some of the dirtier hits out of the game, and kind of reduce some of the injuries that could potentially come back and actually create a lawsuit against the NHL because they didn't look after their players enough, which is actually a very relevant topic because of all the concussion issues going on. Now, that being said, let's talk about what they've done over the past few years as far as consistency and suspensions go. So mainly what happens as far as how something was determined if there's a suspension is if the player was injured. That was the biggest criteria, and while it should be something to keep in mind, in my opinion, it should be the absolute biggest criteria. And it seemed to really influence the length of suspensions and stuff like that, and if a player got a hearing or not. In fact, there'd be plays that would be identical, and one player didn't get hurt, and one player did, and the player that delivered the hit that got hurt would get a lot longer of a suspension than the exact same one, which is almost like flipping a coin and saying, oh, he didn't get hurt, oh, we'll give him 2 more games or something like that. And it just was a little bit odd to kind of see a system like that in place. The other thing that NHL doesn't really suspend players for is intent, and this is something that I would eventually like to see kind of reviewed. The biggest one that I can remember is definitely the Dustin Brown on Jaden Schwartz thing. I think this is actually in the playoffs or late in the regular season. And this was in, a St. Louis Blues LA Kings game where Jaden Schwartz has the puck at center ice, and Dustin Brown, not only does he go for a knee on Jaden Schwartz, he actually swings his elbow at him. Doesn't connect on either, which is definitely a very good thing because it probably would have been an injury. But you could tell from watching the replay that it was definitely a reckless play, a very stupid play, and something that could have resulted in a very serious injury. Which to me, being a hockey fan, seeing that and seeing something like a player hit someone that was honestly less severe, but because Brown didn't make contact, he didn't get suspended. I think they do need to look at that a little bit more. It definitely was one of those plays. It's just really, you're not going to suspend him for it. But enough with that being said, that's in the past, and let's talk about how the NHL has moved forward with suspensions. And the Burrows suspension for getting 3 games instead of 1 or 2 games like most people were expecting is actually pretty key, and here's why. Simply put, the NHL just can't go ahead and be oh, we're raising all the suspensions, we're doubling them. We're taking a 2-game suspension and going to 4 games, because the NHLPA and the players would start appealing those based on the past precedents, which is why this 3-game suspension is key, because typically in the past this would be a 1 or 2 game suspension. However, that 1 extra game isn't going to allow for appeal, and it's going to slowly build upon it. So while the NHL can't just say all of a sudden we're going to double the length of suspensions, they can grow it over 3-4 years and slowly increase the suspensions without having all the issues of players appealing their suspensions. And honestly, I think it's a way it definitely has to work out. It's something that is definitely in the key interest of both sides, the NHL and the players. And if you can protect the players from getting injured, you're obviously going to have a better on-ice product. And if you have a better on-ice product, you're going to be making more money, which is a win-win all around. So, personally speaking, I do think the NHL needs to be tougher on suspensions. And I also think they're doing the right steps in order to kind of increase the severity of the suspensions. It is a very fine line they have to walk, as they can't all of a sudden be yo, this 2-game suspension that was last year is now a 4-game suspension for next year. And players will just appeal it, say, look, the past precedent was 2 games, so it should be 2 games for me. And you know what? They're probably going to win that case 90% of the time, which is why the Burrows suspension, again, is key. It upped it 1 game, which doesn't sound like much, but over the course of 2 years, if they can up the suspension 1 game every 2 years, you're all of a sudden going to see a 4-game suspension be the same as a 2-game suspension 2, 3, 4 years ago, which is definitely something that I think the NHLPA is probably, and the NHL in general, the Department of Player Safety, probably has a little bit of an agenda to do. I'm really looking forward to seeing how it plays out and how they kind of go forward, judging future hits and stuff like that. But again, they have to walk that really fine line. And not only do they have to walk the fine line between how to slowly increase suspensions to crack down on like the severity of the hits and stuff like that, they also have to walk the fine line between what is too lenient and what is too strict. There's a very, very fine line there, because you can't anger every single fan in the game by giving a player too little of a suspension or by too much of a suspension. And also, if they give too long of a suspension out to a player, especially someone of a star player caliber, like say, I don't know, Sidney Crosby commits a headshot or something like that 3-4 years from now, and they all of a sudden exponentially increase that to be an automatic 10-game suspension. Well, you're not going to want to suspend Sidney Crosby for 10 games because you're going to lose a lot of money. And as bad as it sounds to say that, both sides, the NHLPA and NHL, is probably going to be somewhat in agreement there. They want to make sure the players are safe, but at the same time, you don't want to decrease that kind of quality of on-ice product. And by having the larger and longer suspensions based off precedents, you're going to run into that issue. So they're in a very tough situation. It's very tough to get it right, and I think that's something that a lot of us tend to forget about. One of the biggest misconceptions with increasing the suspension severity is that it's going to immediately crack down on players committing reckless hits in the game. I mean, players are still going to make the hits regardless, and that's one of the biggest things that people are just like, oh, well, instead of getting a 2-game suspension, they'll have a 5-game suspension. They're not going to make that hit. In reality, because of how fast the game goes, players are still going to make that hit. And furthermore, it's just a part of human nature. Players and people in general are always trying to just kind of push the boundaries a little bit that are set out for them. And they're ultimately, they're going to try to kind of push the rules and gain that competitive advantage. Because, I mean, heck, you look at all the embellishing in the NHL before they brought in the diving rules and fines this year. Pretty much every player in the NHL embellished. And the reason why they embellished, it gains a power play for their team. What does a power play do? It increases your chances to score. Scoring increases your chances to win. So just kind of this whole chain of events that players are always going to push that fine line between dirty and legal. And they're always going to play on that line. And it's when they cross it that they do have to get suspended for. And finding that fine line is very, very difficult. I think Stefan Quintel and the new Department of Player Safety is in the right direction with it. Hopefully they can continue it up, but let me know what you guys think on the whole suspensions. Do you think increasing the severity of suspensions, like say if they suspended a player for 4 games for something that used to get 2 games, would immediately cut down on reckless hits? That's something that I personally don't think would ever happen, at least in the short term. Long term, yes, not in the short term. Also, do you guys think they got the suspension on Burrows right for 3 games? Let me know in the comment section below. As always, take it easy, and I will catch you guys on the flop side.